Sometimes I try to walk in the door of Walmart. I take 2 steps and I go out the outdoor. And like, yeah, I mean, this is not today. Can't do
Right.
it.
Right.
Not possible.
You know,
Even if I need something.
Yeah.
actually, to confirm your experience, the first 10-day meditation retreat I went to was in, I think it was in 75 or 6 or something like that.
North Fork.
No,
Not
it
that
was
one.
it was outside of Tucson, and it was led by a guy by the name of Robert Hover, who was certified at the same time Goenka was by the same teacher, Uba Khin. Anyway, after spending 10 days in silence in this,
Right.
and we were in a fairly wildernessy kind of place, but we were in cabins and stuff. But I remember leaving that retreat and going into town, and I think I went into like a Circle K or something to get some gas, and the energy was just too much for me to handle. I couldn't handle the energy, and I can understand why. There would be times when we can't be so social.
What is the relationship between jhana practice and skillfulness in the world? Is it eventually one becomes more skillful in their relationships and in their navigation of the physical world? Does that eventually come, or is it one is always, jhana practitioners are always sort of in that antagonistic relationship with the world, and like, skillfulness, where does skillfulness off the meditation cushion come in?
Well, remember the opening of the heart chakra, that, as I mentioned earlier, that tends to come along with the stilling of the mind, and that heart chakra experience is universal love towards all beings. So when you've got that universal love towards all beings, then you don't feel necessarily antagonistic towards others. On the other hand, others may feel antagonistic toward you, and it's not the mystic's fault that they want to drag him out and burn him at the stake.
But I do notice, I felt it myself, that when you go into a rarefied environment, perhaps your tolerance for things that everybody's so tolerant of decreases. So, to me, I've witnessed also intolerance perhaps increasing for those who practice jhana.
Well, to me, first of all, jhana is not a practice. It's just what happens when you're leading a contemplative life that's skillful. But I guess what comes to mind is John the Baptist. I think he was genuinely enlightened in his teaching, but he didn't seem to be a particularly tolerant guy. He was out there.
Brood of vipers.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He was exposing the frauds that are around him, and as I said earlier, the only reason why we call the Buddha the compassionate Buddha is because that's his title. But if you read the discourses of the Buddha, he doesn't strike me as compassionate at all. And I think, I think that probably people like Siddhartha, many mystics, so it's John the Baptist being a good example of that, might be seen as pretty intolerant people.
Honestly, that's one of the reasons I probably am reluctant to go deeper, because it seems, alienation seems to increase in the world, and
Is that part of the hypersensitivity, maybe?
I don't think the hypersensitivity is the cause of the intolerance, but I think that the concern about going deeper would certainly be an aspect of the hypersensitivity, where you're being really sensitive. In fact, one of the problems you mentioned, going to Walmart, and some days you can't walk in there because the energy's not right for you. And I would say that that's a classic example of the hypersensitive phase. So you're feeling the psychic framework of all the people in that building, and the average individual is really, seething with an undercurrent of anxiety, stress, resentment, all that kind of stuff. And it's hard for a mystic to be around that. Just being in a city, the whole city is a bubble of anxiety and resentment. And if you're sensitive to that, if you get to that hypersensitive phase, it's hard to be around it. And I think that's why most mystics head into the wilderness. They've got to get some distance from all those bad vibes. And it's not about them being intolerant. It's about recognizing that they've got to rescue themselves.
But isn't the good news, the next phase is equanimity?
Right, exactly. The next phase is equanimity. So once you've nailed the equanimity, then it's at least a lot easier.
Is that the third?
Yeah.
The third jhana is the equanimity. So the problem here, though, for the person who's moving from the second to the third, is that not only does it come with equanimity, but it comes with all these wacky charisms too. So
I was going to say, and it's great. I mean, sure, I can sit and meditate into the fourth jhana, but I'm not in equanimity all the time. You can ask Karen.
No.
Well,
That's
you
where
can
my
ask-
questions are
you
coming
can ask
from. Like,
him if
Yeah.
I'm in equanimity.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you
You know,
video it?
Yeah.
Well, no, I should have videoed it
They would
for
love that on YouTube.
my detractors, right?
You get more hits than
That,
ever.
after spending a whole day working on my van, and the day before that, and the day before that, and still having mechanical problems, only halfway here. Yeah, I lost my temper.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a resentment that I can't be in the fourth jhana or the third jhana all the time. It's there's such a stark juxtaposition vis-a-vis the circumstances of my life.
Right, the circumstances of life are not really conducive to the contemplative life.
Yeah.
And
Really?
to me, to become enlightened is a full-time job.
Yeah.
And who's going to provide for somebody to, invest all that time into meditation? Well,
No one.
not really
Yeah.
no one, right? But most mystics, most of those enlightened mystics were mendicants. They were homeless, which meant they were homeless. They lived on alms. And my guess is they didn't get fed very often.
Yeah.
Nowadays we've got soup kitchens, so it's easier maybe.
Yeah.
But on the one hand, it's easier because there's food available. But how conducive to enlightenment is sleeping under the bridge,
Yeah.
right?
That's what I mean. It's wow. It's a riddle.
Being eaten by mosquitoes or having ants crawling all over your
Yeah.
sleeping bag.
Yeah.
Being sprayed by the skunk.
Yeah.
yeah, according to Maslow, it's not a good combo.
It's
You
not.
have to have your basic needs
Yeah.
met before you can move into higher,
Yeah.
Well,
higher
he may,
states.
he
Yeah.
may be right, but I bet you Maslow's not enlightened.
No.
Right?
He died too, didn't he?
Maybe I believe he's left this mortal coil.
All right.
I
Generally,
was
the
really tempted
cultures that are in
to ask what
total
level
survival
Maslow
aren't
was
really
on when
practicing
I was taking some
higher states of consciousness.
Oh, I agree. I mean, if we look at
Well, what was he on? But
Okay,
I
sorry.
didn't do it. I checked to see whether I think I can go someplace on whenever that is, and if I don't think I can, I won't do it. But you don't know until you get there.
Right.
You don't know until you get into the fire whether you can do it or not.
No, I agree. And I
It's,
think, personally, I
yeah.
think that's part of the contemplative life. Is you
Yes.
check in, you go, can I today go to the grocery
Right.
store? And
Can I-
no,
can-
I'm a little too sensitive today, so I'm going to skip the
Right.
grocery store.
Can I handle all these dysfunctional families that or people? I can see it instantly. I can walk into any elementary school, well, probably any classroom, and tell whether what's going on educationally in a minute or two. I know.
Sure.
And I don't know how I know, but I know.
Well, you were a school teacher for many years.
That helped.
And you've probably developed a certain level of intuitive. You're proving that you've developed some intuition. So,
Yeah.
to me, it's reasonable to say to accept your
Okay. The wrong day.
right.
Wrong day.
So back to what Karen was talking about with using Maslow's conditions. I'm sorry.
The pyramid. Yeah.
Right. Is that cultures are constantly at war with each other, and there's also plagues and economic depressions and all that, and it's very difficult to become enlightened, I think, in a society that is struggling for survival.
There's so much stress.
Right, right. If you're struggling for survival, your pyramid of needs are not being met, and so I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the enlightened beings arose during prosperous times. The Buddha became enlightened. Well, he came from a wealthy family, but he didn't stay in that wealthy family. He went off as a mendicant. But he lived at a time when there must have been a fair amount of prosperity so that he could, expect to get fed as a mendicant. But I bet you anything that Buddhism, the history of Buddhism shows that it collapsed a number of times. There's no continuity from the Buddha to the present. That's a myth. And I believe the reason why it collapsed is because when famine, when drought, when plague, when war came, that culture was so disrupted that everybody was running to survive. They couldn't possibly have the luxury to sit around meditating in a pleasant place.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm reminded of, in Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, there's a series of stories about this and that, usually religious experiences of, I heard, I saw, no first-hand accounts, a lot of third-hand accounts. But one of the accounts is of some, lord of the land is having the landscape modified to build a park for himself. And he hires the peasants who are dredging, I think, a pond or something like that for him. And in the process, they uncover two yogis who were, fossilized or something under a pile of dirt. And they looked like they were alive. So they went and got the Brahmin priest from the nearby village, and they poured water. And, the Brahmin priest said, "Oh, well, this is how we're going to revive these yogis." So he poured holy water on top of the yogis, and of course nothing happened. Yeah. Right? The yogis were not did not revive. But the question that arose for me was, well, how did those yogis get there to begin with? Why were they covered in sediments? I think the reason why is that, let's say they were mendicants or sadhus, yogis, whatever, who might have had to retreat into the wilderness because there was no food available to them, perhaps because of war or famine, and they just meditated until they died. And then a flood came and covered their bodies up.
Yeah.